Welcome to The Writer's Dream, where authors talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. I'm Linda Maria Frank. I'm the host of the show and the producer, and I am the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries, a mystery series for kids. You can find us on YouTube. We have probably about 125 different authors interviewed, so if you're an author or you are an aspiring author, there's a lot of good advice to be had on our shows. We also have a Facebook page. It's called The Writer's Dream. Guess what? And if you want to be a guest or you're interested in asking me a question, please message me through that Facebook page. That's The Writer's Dream. Today's guest is Barbara Ann Mojica, and she is a historian, an educator of note, and the author of the Little Miss History series, which is, I think, one of the most interesting series I've seen in a very long time, simply because it has to do with history, which I love. So welcome to the show, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And tell us about you. Tell us about your background.
Well, I love history, obviously. I love to travel. And I have spent a long career in education. So now that I have retired from formally teaching, I have tried to combine all of my loves into continuing my passion and sharing it with others. For me as a student, when I was in elementary school, I always loved history, but most kids didn't love history because it was reading the paragraph, you know, going down the row and reading the facts. Okay, Vasco da Gama did this, Magellan did this. It was just a series of boring information which you had to memorize. And as I got older, I had a fantastic teacher in high school who made history come alive. She bounced around the room.
How did she do that?
She was only 4'11", but she just had such an enthusiasm and such a love of history, and she communicated it to her students. She told stories. She embellished the events. She made it come alive.
It's the telling of the story, isn't it?
It is, and that's what history is. It's the story of the past.
Yes.
So if you go way back to ancient times, in the 6th century BC, Herodotus, the Greek historian, who's often called the father of history, he told stories. That's what he did. Now, of course, they weren't always completely factually accurate, and he certainly didn't check.
Well, that hasn't changed.
No.
Much.
But, I mean, he made it come alive. And as time went on, of course, things got more and more factual and more data-driven. And as our education system evolved, you know, we went through that, you know, the automobile kind of factory industry model. And education was exactly the same.
Well, you know, that's always to me, because I also taught, and I taught for more years than I was anything else. What I found was there was always that trying to achieve that balance between getting your students to learn the facts, because I find an appalling dearth of factual information from the generation that we have taught, and making it interesting. The balance between those two. I supervised student teachers for a while, and I said, you know, it's important to be a good lecturer and a storyteller. Yes, you have to get the kids to do hands-on and get involved and whatnot, but sometimes they just like to listen to a good story.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, 100%. If you've seen some of those Jay Leno spots where they go out and interview people and ask them, who was George Washington? And there were people that actually
It's the guy they named that street after. I know.
It's scary. And even in our schools, I mean, they don't teach civics anymore. People don't know about government. They don't know about...
But you know what? I taught in high school for a long time, and when I supervised student teachers, I got to go into a lot of different classrooms, and I have to say they do teach it. What happens is it's not practiced. In other words, people in general do not get involved in government.
Right.
They don't read the newspaper about their local politicians. They don't find out what's going on at the grassroots level. And then they lose the whole thing about civics. And actually, if they really watch the news, they would be able to refresh that information that they did learn one time. My kids had to take a regents examination at the end of the year, and I told them that what would happen, I taught them how to study, and I said, you really need to develop your long-term memory. And I said, but even that long-term memory, you're going to walk out of that regents exam and you're going to forget 65% of what you learned in my course. And of course, that was very depressing to them, but it's true. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Right. And I agree with you. I mean, we're all so today with social media, with technology, with the texting, everybody wants to be so connected with the world, yet
what are they connected with?
There's such a disconnect. I mean, they spend more time.
It's a disconnect from reality. They're connected to their friends in a very small world. It's very parochial, very small world, and they don't connect with the outside world, which was the intent of the internet, was to connect with the outside world, but they don't do it. Snapshot, Instagram, texting. It's all very insular, very personal.
And then it's forgotten. It's, you know, like it's whatever the thing is, you know, whatever is popular is at the moment.
But anyway, tell us about your books, because we're never going to solve this problem.
No, for sure. Well, my series is based on a character named Little Miss History, who is kind of a prototype of myself. I have a picture here of
Hold it against your chest.
what I used to, this is me long ago. And you can see the sunglasses. I actually did have sunglasses similar to Miss History's. And as I said, I enjoyed traveling. I enjoyed hiking. And I loved history, so a lot of it involved traveling to historic places. So my husband developed a prototype. My husband is an artist and an illustrator, and he illustrates my books.
He does a great job.
So he developed a prototype based on a younger version of myself, and I wear a kind of camp outfit because a lot of times I'm outdoors, not always, but many times I am. And I wear hiking boots, and they're like 3 sizes too big, and that's kind of like a memory of my father who had huge feet. So I just made my hiking boots huge. And she wears this outfit wherever she goes. And she travels back in time very often. Sometimes she's outdoors, as in the Sequoia book. This one is about Sequoia National Park.
Yeah, give us a rundown of all the places you've...
Okay, well, the first book was Mount Rushmore, traveling to Mount Rushmore. The second one was the Statue of Liberty. The third book is Sequoia National Park. And this one not only has history, but it has a lot of
nature?
Science, nature, and environment in it as well. The fourth one I wrote in honor of the 150th anniversary of the assassination of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater. But it's not a history of the assassination itself, it's a history of Ford's Theater, where it came from, what happened to it, and so on. The next book was the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. And this one tells the very long and storied history of the Intrepid. Started out as an aircraft carrier, went through a huge evolution. So it took part in World War II. It was an anti-submarine warfare carrier during the Cold War, not actually an actual war.
The planes that flew were
right, were launched from there, and they had some of the fastest launch attacks.
Probably had the same plane that I just put in my last book, The Avenger.
It was also instrumental in the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. It served as a recovery vessel for the space capsules of Grissom and Young, mm-hmm. and the Molly Brown. And then it was finally decommissioned in 1974, and it was destined for the scrap heap. But Zachary Fisher, a retired admiral, found it and used his own money to rescue it. It was turned into a floating museum, and it's at Pier 86 in New York City. But it wasn't done yet because in 2001, after the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center, it was actually used as FBI headquarters to investigate the terror.
FBI headquarters.
Right. So they used the ship as a base of operations.
And then they had to, at one point, because I saw them do it, I was actually at the top of the top of the rock, and I was watching them try to get it out of the mud. They had to repair it because it was rusting so badly.
Yes.
That they had to bring it into dry dock and repair it, and it was mired in the mud. And it was interesting to watch from way up high and see how they maneuvered the boat out of the ship.
Chains, and, all kinds of contraptions.
But that's a great place to visit. They have.
Oh, and it's constantly changing.
Yes.
This summer, they have a Star Trek exhibit.
Oh, yeah,
You can
Star
also
Trek.
see the Enterprise, the shuttle, the space shuttle.
Right,
Is
right.
also on the deck. World War I planes, World War II planes. And it has the Explorium, which is an interactive hall. And
They have the Concorde. They have a submarine.
you can watch, movies of the actual war history footage. You can climb into helicopters. You can climb around into old space capsules. And that also is constantly changing. They're constantly changing the exhibits. And next door is the Growler, the nuclear submarine. So
right.
you can go through there and see all of that as well.
The most interesting thing to me when I visit the Intrepid, because when my son visits with his family, we almost always go to some military thing to memorial to visit. And the most interesting thing to me are the World War II veterans who act as docents on the ship. And it's amazing because they're all in their very late 80s and 90s, and very soon we won't have any of these eyewitness people to World War II. And their stories are very interesting. So what's next for Little Miss
There's
History?
one more.
Sorry.
This is the most recent one, Ellis Island. Okay. This, goes over exactly what happened to the immigrants when they came to Ellis Island. Starting out, with the first immigration center was on Castle Island, which is in the Battery Park. Then they moved it to Ellis Island, and more than 100 million immigrants came through Ellis Island during that short period, mostly between 1892 when it opened and 1924. That's when the vast majority of them came through. And Ellis Island began as a sandbar. It belonged to a butcher named Samuel Ellis, and he sold it to the state. It was used in the War of 1812 as a military base. And then it was sold to the federal government, and they constructed Ellis Island, which didn't last long because it burned down after a few years, and they had to reconstruct it. So they got two outstanding architects of the time who actually won a gold medal for designing.
This is, again, another place that is just absolutely fascinating to visit, and it was badly damaged in Sandy.
Yes, a lot of the exhibits were removed because not so much, they didn't have real water damage, but the humidity in the building was so great because the sub-basement flooded, and they had to move everything. And the photographs and the exhibits were moved to museums all over the country. And some of them still aren't back.
No, I know. The last time I was there a year ago, last April, and they were installing the temperature and humidity controls throughout the building. so that they won't have to do that. And a lot of the exhibits were missing, because the first time I went there, they had so many wonderful artifacts from people who had gone through Ellis Island and then contributed them. And I think now they're in the process of raising money to open the hospital building.
Yes, the hospital is called the Sad Side. I have a picture. Pretty bad.
Yeah.
And you actually have to wear a hard hat if you want to go for a tour of the hospital grounds.
Because things
That's
are
how
falling
dangerous
apart,
it is.
yeah.
It's falling apart, which is a real shame. But in my books, I try to mention not only the events and the significance of the outstanding players, but people that are not as well known.
Right.
And that were either ignored or neglected, or in some cases somewhat abused because they weren't recognized.
Now, your writing style, do you write the stories, from a first-person perspective? In other words, your character is Little Miss History. Is she telling the story in the first person?
No. In the beginning, I have a little poem that each...
Would you like to read something from it? Sure.
Little Miss History introduces each one of the stories with this little poem. So the stories are all individual, and even though it is a series, it's trademarked and copyrighted as a series. It's really independent. She's the main character, and she's always involved in leading the tour.
So the books stand alone?
Yes, they definitely do stand alone. A long time ago, as a little girl, I dreamed of traveling all over the world. And often I'd ask about the past, driving everyone crazy fast. Amused by this, my parents thought, why not call me History for short? And her symbol is the globe, as you see. She's sitting on top of the world.
Now, are you self-published, or do you have a publisher?
No, I published through Eugenis Studios.
Through who?
Eugenis Studios. It's a small publishing company.
Okay, yeah. Because there's actually a few ways to publish.
Right.
Some of the people who watch aren't aware of that. You can form your own company and just publish yourself, get a graphic designer and have them do the computer program, and then go to a printer who'll print your books. You can do small press, which is what you did, a small publisher. You can do self-publishing, which is a big industry now, or you can spend your life waiting to be discovered by a traditional publisher.
And if I were 20 years,
Exactly.
maybe I would do that, but at this point, I want to get my message out.
Right.
I want to get it out to as many